What happens if a tragedy that completely broke our hearts was never actually the end of the story, but merely a brutal, extended intermission? What if this moment becomes the beginning of something much bigger? Something that rewrites the entire history of the past year and flips the canvas upside down? Guys, I do not think we are paying close enough attention to what comes next. We are all so focused on the tears, the mourning, and the immediate fallout, but what if the real shocker is waiting just across the water, completely unaware of her own identity? If you ask me, the canvas is perfectly primed for a resurrection that will shatter the current dynamics and force every single character to reevaluate their alliances, their grief, and their future. We are looking at a potential reality where the dead are not actually dead, and the lost are just waiting to be found by the most unlikely of saviors. The story could be heading toward a revelation that changes the fundamental DNA of Port Charles. Let us take a quick look at the current board just to see exactly where our key players are standing right now. We have Scout Quartermain and Rocco Falconeri, two teenagers who are absolutely suffocating under the crushing weight of their respective family dramas. Rocco is drowning in the terrifying aftermath of shooting Ross Cullum, dealing with the intense fallout involving his parents, Dante Falconeri and Lulu Spencer, and the immense eating guilt of letting Jason Morgan take the fall and be hauled off to a WSB black site. On the other side, we have Scout, who is caught right in the dangerous crossfire of Drew Kane's miraculous yet highly volatile recovery and the dark, manipulative secrets swirling around Willow Kane. These kids are being pushed to their absolute psychological limit. They are standing on a powder keg of adult mistakes, mob ties, and WSB cover-up. They are trapped in a town where their parents' choices constantly put them in the line of fire. The pressure cooker is whistling, and it is only a matter of time before these two decide they cannot take another single second of the Port Charles toxicity. They need an escape, a place where no one can force them to choose sides. This brings us to the first massive future scenario. There is a strong chance that Scout and Rocco, desperate for breathing room, decide to run away together. They might seek refuge far from the chaos, stealing a boat and ending up at a secluded, weathered cabin on an island, perhaps very close to where the Quartermain boat had its infamous, tragic incident. But they do not just find an empty sanctuary. They find Sam McCall. Yes, guys. What if Sam is actually alive, but suffering from profound, debilitating amnesia? This could lead to an incredibly emotional and slow burn awakening that would be legendary. Imagine the scene. Scout and Rocco break into this dark, dusty cabin, expecting isolation and a place to hide for a few days, only to come face to face with a woman who has no idea who she is or why she is so intimately tied to Port Charles. At first, the kids might not even recognize her in the dim light, or perhaps she looks drastically different, weathered by the elements and the heavy fog of her lost memories. But then, a distinct, undeniable connection spark. What happens next may be the most beautifully tragic sequence we have seen in years. Scout's face, her voice, or perhaps a specific tiny mannerism triggers something buried deep within Sam's fractured psyche. I truly believe Scout is the ultimate key to unlocking Sam's mind. Every single time Scout mentions Port Charles, Danny, Jason, or even just the name of a familiar street, a puzzle piece violently falls into place for Sam. The story could be heading toward a beautiful, painful reconciliation where a daughter unknowingly heals her mother's broken. We would see fragmented images flashing in Sam's head, the docks, the leather jackets, the danger, the love, but she still cannot piece them into a cohesive. Who benefits from this incredible discovery? Danny and Jason, who have been wandering through their own darkness and trying to rebuild their lives, would suddenly have their anchor back. Who is in danger? Anyone who benefited from Sam's absence, or anyone who might have known she survived and kept her hidden. The psychological weight of Scout and Rocco having to decide whether to bring this confused, fragile woman back to a town that might have caused her death in the first place is staggering. But we have to look ahead and consider a completely different path, one that is much darker and far more manipulative. What if the kids are not the first ones to realize who this mystery woman is? What if Drew Kane, in his frantic, aggressive, and potentially unhinged search for the runaway teenagers, tracks them to the island and finds Sam first? If that happens, the entire landscape changes overnight. Drew has been exhibiting some incredibly dark, controlling tendencies lately, especially with his manipulative tactics involving Willow and Nina and his intense desire to control his narrative. What if Drew realizes Sam is alive and has no memory, and he decides to use this to his absolute advantage? He could intercept Scout and Rocco, completely isolate Sam, and keep her existence a closely guarded secret from Jason and Dan. This is not just a minor variation in the plot. This would alter the entire fabric of the show. Drew could convince an amnesiac Sam that he is her only protector, feeding her a fabricated history that paints Jason and the rest of Port Charles as the ultimate villain. This path would turn Drew into a full-blown psychological antagonist, placing Scout and Rocco in immense physical and emotional danger as they become the only ones who know the truth, trapped in a web of lies with a man willing to do anything to keep his ultimate leverage over his brother. Now, let us explore the third future. And guys, this is the absolute wild card. This is the scenario that very few people are anticipating, but it would be absolutely fascinating and heartbreaking to watch unfold. What if Sam's memories do return, triggered by Scout and Rocco's desperate pleas, but instead of a joyous, tear-filled reunion, it brings a horrifying realization? What if Sam remembers everything? The mob violence, the constant danger, the kidnappings, the trauma of Shiloh, the heartbreak of losing Jason over and over again, and she decides she does not want to go back? The bigger consequence may be that Sam actively, consciously rejects her old life. She looks at Scout and Rocco with full clarity in her eyes and tells them that the woman they knew had to die so this new woman could live in peace. She might even beg the kids to stay with her on the island, to abandon the toxicity of Port Charles forever. This would be a massive psychological blow to Scout, who came looking for an escape but found a mother who refuses to be saved and refuses to return to the family. It flips the script entirely. Instead of the kids bringing the mother home to heal the town, the mother tries to pull the kids into her self-imposed exile to protect them from the town. It is a heartbreaking, unexpected twist that forces every viewer to question whether the lives our favorite characters lead in Port Charles are actually worth returning to. If you ask me, the path that feels most likely and carries the absolute most emotional resonance is the first one. I keep coming back to the idea that Scout and Rocco, two kids fundamentally broken by the adults in their lives, become the ultimate savior. It makes perfect narrative sense for the history of this show. The adults in Port Charles are so utterly consumed by their vendettas, their cold fusion projects, their WSB cover-ups, and their mob wars that they are completely blind to what truly matters. It takes the innocence, the rebellion, and the desperation of runaway children to uncover the biggest miracle of the decade. I truly believe we are heading toward a storyline where Scout's sheer presence acts as the undeniable catalyst for Sam's return to reality. The poetic justice of Scout, who has felt so lost, neglected, and controlled by Drew's drama, being the one to find her mother and guide her back to the light, is just too good for the writers to pass up. It gives the younger generation a massive heroic agency that they have been desperately lacking. They aren't just pawns in Jason and Drew's endless games anymore. They become the active architects of their own family's salvation. They unintentionally flip the entire investigative narrative on its head. But we absolutely cannot stop there. If that scenario plays out, if Scout and Rocco successfully bring a slowly awakening Sam McCall back to the docks of Port Charles, what happens next? The fallout will be astronomical, and the shockwaves will hit every single corner of the city. Think about the immediate impact on the current relationship. How does Jason react? He just made a monumental decision to leave the mob, to walk away from Sonny's organization, to prioritize Danny. When the love of his life returns from the dead, does this pull him back into the darkness to protect her? Or does it give him the final, undeniable push he needs to stay in the light and build a real family? And what about Drew? If Drew is already spiraling, seeing Sam return, especially if she instinctively gravitates toward Jason or holds Drew accountable for his recent dark actions, could push him entirely over the edge into pure villainy. Furthermore, Dante is currently trying to build a new life with Elizabeth, trying to move on from his own deep trauma. Sam's return would send a seismic tremor through his world, forcing him to confront buried feelings and unresolved grief. The custody arrangements, the legal implications of her death, and the WSB's potential involvement in why she was on that island in the first place This is not just a happy ending tied up with a bow. It is the match that lights a dozen new fires. The future consequences of Sam stepping off a boat with Scout and Rocco will dictate the storylines, the betrayals, and the romances for the next 5 years. Port Charles is never going to be the same. And looking ahead, the future just keeps expanding into brilliant, uncharted territory.
Goodbye. Please like, subscribe, and comment on the GH Spoilers Daily channel.